All right. Hi, everyone, in person and on Zoom. We will be talking today about benchmarking research. So we'll kind of discuss what does that mean and also, how can we use this concept in our own context as well. A little bit about us. Previously, all worked together. I'm Clarissa Anderson. I manage a team of course developers at OU Education Services, working with the University of Oklahoma. Jane and Aleithia, I don't know if you want to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, sure. I am Jane Mason. I am an instructional support specialist at Baylor University.
And I'm Aleithia Stephens. I am the manager of the instructional support team, also at Baylor University.
So, in terms of what we'll be talking about today, we'll start with an introduction, some use cases for how we've used it in the past, and then we'll also really talk about, again, how do we apply it to our context? So, how would we address some of these situations at our institution? Have a little bit of a discussion about how we might use AI to, I guess, make the process more efficient and less time consuming as well. And then we'll also have time for questions. So in terms of what we'll be talking about today, we'll address what the purpose, the value of benchmarking research is for our courses, talk about briefly a bit of that process of conducting that research, writing a report. But really the major thing that we want is the takeaways that you all can think about some ways that you can incorporate it into your work as well.
Okay, I will start with the introduction. So we are going to be talking specifically about what we call benchmarking surveys. And I know that in different contexts, benchmarking can refer to different things. But when we are using this term, we specifically are referring to research that is conducted to examine how other institutions run particular courses or degree programs. Now, given kind of the population, you all as instructional designers, today we are going to focus primarily on course benchmarking and how that works with individual courses. But in our over the last few years, we have done work not only for benchmarking courses, but programs as well. I think that it can be effective. There's some differences, but just to use our time effectively today, we will focus specifically on course benchmarking. Um, and course benchmarking is going to be part of the front end of course development. So when really this is doing research as you're getting started and making a plan for how you're going to approach designing your course. Now, benchmarking surveys are useful in really several different ways. First of all, they're designed to identify opportunities for your institution to provide innovations or niche offerings in terms of courses. So you're really looking to see kind of what's out there and through the research process, not just understanding what other people do, but also getting ideas of, okay, how, might we be different or how can we take strengths that we have here at our institution and then integrate those into the course design. Benchmarking surveys are also useful because they provide essential context that, as instructional designers, we need to be able to prepare for design consultations and for moving forward with creating the course. So you're surveying, you're getting a lay of the land, you're understanding different approaches that others have taken to this particular course or subject, and then you're using that information to help guide your decisions about what makes sense with your, particular situation. Benchmarking surveys are also useful when you're taking an existing course, either a course that exists in an online or hybrid format, or maybe one that has existed as a face-to-face, and you're trying to transition it to an online format. You're able to research and evaluate current trends, and then use that information to revamp or redesign courses that currently exist. And before we proceed, just a couple of points of clarification on benchmarking. Benchmarking is not just us wanting to do what other people are doing. Rather, what we're trying to do specifically with benchmarking is understanding what competitors are doing, what other institutions, and then finding out how we want to differentiate ourselves, what it is that we, want to do or not. Benchmarking is also, it is a tool, but it is not a substitute for formal instructional design. You're not going out there and, looking at what other people have done and then just doing that. You're gathering information, you're gathering context so that that will then inform how you approach instructional design. And lastly, benchmarking is only used as needed for course development. So the three of us collectively have done probably several dozen benchmarks over the last few years, but we don't do it for every course. There are plenty of instances where faculty already have the material they need. They feel confident, but as we'll get into the use cases here in a moment, benchmarking is going to be useful in specific times when you're looking for more information. You're trying to find a better sense of direction for how to approach designing a particular course.
Yeah, so we want to just quickly gauge kind of our audience and see kind of the experiences that you may have with benchmarking. So if you have a phone quickly that you could scan the QR code, I'm also going to put the link in the chat. And you go to menti.com. We have just a quick question of, does anyone have experience with course benchmarking or related research? And again, I'll move that QR code up there again real quick. And I shared the link in the chat if that's easier for those virtual as well. So it looks like we have a lot of no's coming in.
And that's okay. That tells us where to start.
Great. Yeah, that sounds great.
I do think it's worth saying, as we've got more responses coming in, that as we are, going through the presentation here, it may be that you have not done benchmarking in a formal way, in a formal or standardized way that we're describing, but you may recognize some of the elements of benchmarking that we're talking about as things that you have done. So keep that in mind, particularly when we get to the activity and discussion. Even if you haven't done, well, I wouldn't expect that you've done exactly what we have done before, but feel free to bring in other, related elements of your experience when we get to the practical applications.
Yeah, so for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next section. Clarissa?
Yeah, so now we're going to talk about some ways that we've used this in the past. So thinking about some varied courses, what did we need in those situations, and then how did we address that? So Aleithia mentioned, in our case, we did it a little more formalized. So you'll see like screenshots from like reports that we did. We started making reports because the initial output first was spreadsheets. And then you have so much data, it becomes very overwhelming for a faculty member to really be able to take in all of that information. So since we were doing some of that research ourselves, we just started making some reports so that way they knew, what do I need to pay attention to? And they have access to the data if they want to, but most cases, people will prefer that report.
Yeah, so our first example is one that I did for a politics and education administration course. The unique part of this course was that the instructor had not taught this course in over 10 years. And so lots of things with that, wanted to, update the course to have automated grading with providing timely feedback, wanted some sort of low stakes knowledge checks, wanted to remove those high stakes assignments, and then obviously, because it's 10 years old, wanted to look into revising or updating those course resources. So several reasons why this instructor was interested in this course benchmarking. And so here are just a couple screen grabs from the report that I put together of, showing what we found from the syllabi that we found online. So, they were really interested in those course components. So here we provide a graph of, what are the most frequent course components that we saw within the syllabus. So, policy papers, participation points, some sort of presentations, and then again, some other case examples of those assessments. So bringing over from the syllabi exactly the directions that were provided. They were asked to bring in a news item related to the field of education. They would have to highlight the main points. And so this was a great opportunity for the instructor to go in and see how are other individuals kind of framing these courses, and what can I do to be different, but also really engage my students.
So this is another example where, some of our programs have a lot of adjunct faculty and they may have never taught before. So in this case, we had one of those instructors, really expert in their field, but did not know much about learning objectives or other instructional design concepts we're very familiar with. So they really wanted kind of everything and anything that there could be about that. So it just takes more time than a more targeted one, but especially things like, well, what other materials are people using? Like, what topics are they focusing on? And then especially looking at things like the learning objectives. So here highlighted a couple of things I just talked about. So what were those frequent learning objectives? So in this case, some major ones were like business impact, digital strategy, emerging technologies, and then also some of those textbooks that people were using, other articles. You can see in this case that there wasn't really a trend in the resources used, but even when there's not trends, that is kind of a finding as well. So.
Yeah, this next one was for a clinical mental health counseling course called psychopathology. And the special part of this course was that it needed to meet specific requirements for the KCREP accreditation. And so that was a big piece that the instructional designer wanted us to look for, specifically making sure it was updated to the newest accreditation. So being mindful of accreditation, but then also looking for textbooks from similar courses, and kind of analyzing how a syllabi in a course can align with those KCREP standards. And so here we have just a quick example of pulling over from the syllabi which KCREP standards were actually utilized within the course or listed within the syllabus. And then they wanted, again, that full list of course materials. And like Clarissa mentioned, I think even in this one, you can see there were a lot of options based on the syllabi we found. And again, that's a finding as well, even if you don't find certain trends.
Oh, sorry. Bad timing to rename myself on Zoom, sorry. So I think this is our last use case example, if I'm correct. But this is a case where the course was transitioning from 2 credit hours to 3 credit hours. And because of that, they really wanted to know, like, what are some of those assignments, especially ones that will really prioritize that real world application. So the course was previously very exam based, very probably dry. So how can we incorporate things that are a lot more practical, tied to the field? And then also, what are some other materials, in particular, what are some case studies that they could focus on as well? So here we have our example. Some of those case examples of final projects, final papers, things like that. In this case, there's a water policy briefing. And then, copied and paste from the syllabus. I'm not going to try to fix anything that it's the example is the example. And then the cases that they used as well. So it's cut off on screen so we could fit it here, but we also indicated like how many times that particular case has been used before. So And we do this for textbooks as well, too. If there's a lot of people using it, there's probably a reason for that. A lot of cases it's because it's the main textbook in your field, or maybe there's a couple of main textbooks for that subject as well.
And one other thing before we move on from the water law, because I remember working on this one with
Mhm.
Clarissa. This is was a really good example of when benchmarking was useful because the faculty for this course was, in fact, a professor of law. And the course was, I don't remember what degree program it was, but it was for non-law students. So the
I
faculty
think it was
needed,
hydrology.
yeah, that might have been it. Yeah, someone, something in STEAM. But the faculty needed guidance on how to really present their subject for students who are not experts, who don't have that broader background in law. But yeah, I want to mention before we go further, just a few kind of limitations that are common to run into when you're trying to do benchmarking research. The first one is when you're talking about course benchmarking, being able to conduct a benchmark is really, it's going to be dependent on how many syllabi you can find from relevant courses. And depending on what you're looking for, sometimes there's lots of data that can be found, and other times there's just not that many syllabi that are available publicly. So I mentioned that just really to say, don't, be discouraged. If you're not finding things, sometimes the syllabi just don't exist. They're not out there. And relatedly, something that I have noticed, and Clarissa and Jane as well, over time, because we started doing these several years ago, over time, as Google has made changes to their search engine optimization, what I have found is it's actually harder to find. It's become harder to find searches that I need, keywords that I used to use, types of searches. I had to be more kind of creative in trying to figure out how to change it up so that Google would not just show me what I thought I wanted to see, but actually give me a broader range of search results. Another issue kind of related to limited availability of syllabi is that often faculty are becoming more protective about sharing or distributing their syllabi out of concerns of, wanting to preserve their intellectual property. Understandably so. In the era of AI now, that has even changed things a bit further, but one other limitation that is not uncommon to run into when you're trying to do benchmarking is sometimes you may be looking for particular topics, and you may not find much because other courses out there might not exist. I remember one that I was trying to do, and it was something related to Lean Six Sigma. And there's lots of that out there, but the way that the faculty had envisioned the course, they said, "Oh, I wanted to do X, Y, and Z." I went out there, I looked, I said, based on everything I'm seeing, this is just not being done.
Yeah, so we're going to move into a small exercise portion of our presentation. And so we really want to get you all thinking about applying these benchmarking concepts to a real world scenario and kind of outline a simple action plan just to kind of think about how it could be used within your role. So we are going to break up into teams. Clarissa, how many individuals are in person?
Three, not including me.
Okay, so we'll stick
Maybe
with
four.
one group in person. Um, and then we'll break up into a couple breakout rooms here online. And so each group is going to have a different scenario. And on the next slide, we'll have some discussion questions and guiding questions to help you kind of work through creating your own plan for this specific scenario. So our first scenario is replacing tests with practical or real world assessments. We have number 2, which will be adding credentialing and badges into a program. 3 would be defining capstone course structure. 4 is comparing models of hybrid courses. 5 is integrating internships into online courses, and 6 is exploring AI integration in coursework. And so all 6 of these are other use case examples that we have looked for when we are conducting benchmarks in the past. And so, Clarissa, what number do you want the in-person group to do?
Well, I think you are. Okay, they're gonna do four.
Okay, they want number 4. So comparing models of hybrid courses. And then I'm going to take a breakout room and we'll be doing the number 1, replacing tests with practical assessments. And then Aleithia is going to take a group as well.
Yeah, I think we'll do number 3, the defining capstone course
Okay,
structure.
perfect. And I just quickly want to go through the guiding questions. So some things to think about when you're working through this, the stakeholders, what that data collection looks like, the use of findings, as well as challenges or obstacles you may face. And so these are just guiding questions to help you work through it. I'll keep these up on the screen, and we will go ahead and break out into our rooms. I'm going to assign automatically. And we are going to come back at 11:17. So that gives us about 10 minutes. And yeah, I have opened rooms so individuals can break out. And if Clarissa, if you just want to mute us.
I'm gonna say we should do that.
Okay. Looks like everybody's back, and I know I want to be, aware of our time, but let's take just a couple of minutes to debrief and chat. So I'm wondering, and just feel free to jump in either verbally or, unmute yourself. As you were doing this activity and thinking about benchmarking, what in particular stood out to you?
I think for me, I really appreciated, Aleithia, how you called out in the beginning how we might not recognize what we've been doing as benchmarking, but like once you kind of explained it, it's like, oh, I have actually done some of this before. And really kind of thinking about it. I've had more experience kind of at the program level than at the course level. But I really appreciated kind of that distinction. And we talked about how, I've had faculty in the past who maybe weren't as familiar with the course content. So there were a lot more holes that we kind of needed to make sure we were filling. And I could definitely see a use case for this for sure.
And I was just going to say the importance of reaching out to people in the industry, current industry workers, because the knowledge that the instructors have could be 5, 10, 25 years old. And yes, I know you're more comfortable with the thesis, but students need insert product.
Absolutely. Something that we touched on in our discussion that I think sometimes can make faculty or those of us who work specifically in higher ed a little uncomfortable is, thinking about kind of marketability and degree relevance. Those can be uncomfortable. You want to be committed to your subject, but at the same time, there is that realistic aspect of, this program is a financial investment for students. You want it to be solid. You want them to be able to tie specific career outcomes to it. And so when you're thinking about designing the specific course or the capstone, or even speaking more broadly about programs, you don't just want to have the piece that exists, that particular course exists in and of itself, but how does it fit into the larger whole of the course, the program? What's the broader context? And talking to more people, whether it's faculty or program admins or people from elsewhere, I think is really important. Any other thoughts? Did anyone maybe as you were kind of thinking about, oh, we've got here in the chat. I'm just going to read this out real quick. We had an instructional design meeting where a director of financial aid said, your program does not lead directly to a job. Chances are students will not get financial aid for it. That's really important to think about. These programs are not expensive. They're a significant investment, and that's got to be considered. But I wonder real quick, so that we can keep moving, just as you think about, the idea of benchmarking, has anyone had any thoughts about how you might approach this for your own particular role or how you might be able to fit this into the kind of work that you do?
Yes, I'll just say that I think that for me, I see a lot of opportunity just to add this to certain areas of the course design process, especially of course in those planning, initial planning stages, the conversations around the course map and the objectives and things of that nature. So I think that it's something that I at least in my experience, I don't think faculty would expect. So it'd be a nice kind of icing layer of service and some fresh data points to sort of bolster idea generation, things of that nature.
That's great to hear, Abby. I'll add it to our agenda for the next leadership meeting.
What have I done?
I did like how you called out the technology tools, because I think we can get used to like, this is what we use and we have it used, but making sure that we're keeping up with whatever is industry relevant. I think that's really important because we don't want to dump a bunch of students out there who then know how to do this thing this one way, but don't know how to do it in the real world way. So I hadn't thought about it specifically in that framework. So that's interesting.
Speaking of tech tools, I feel like that's a perfect segue to our next section on AI. Since we are really short on time, Clarissa, do you want to jump ahead maybe to Sanoja's video?
Yeah. So just to kind of give a little context to this, we talked a lot about some various use cases, but how can we also expedite this process as well? So I have a video here from one of my colleagues, who's been doing these benchmarks, and then he also has a master's in data science analytics. So perfect to figure out like how can we make this more optimal, keeping in mind time, but also the quality of that data as well. So this is a video, very short video he recorded in terms of like some of the ways that he can improve that process.
Hi, today we're exploring how to use generative AI tools such as ChatGPT for benchmarking. Let's consider an example benchmark. In this case, we collect all the required information from PDFs. To demonstrate how PDFs can be used with AI for collecting survey data, we open the PDF, copy its link, and paste it into ChatGPT. ChatGPT uses inbuilt retrieval augmented generation, RAG, to read and extract information from the PDF. You can generalize the prompt and include additional questions to ensure more comprehensive data collection, especially for details that might otherwise be overlooked. Once the information is collected, some data, such as learning outcomes or course topics, require deeper analysis. In this example, we'll focus on learning outcomes. We copy the learning outcomes and paste them into ChatGPT. With a predefined prompt ready, we press enter. ChatGPT processes the input as an analysis request and performs internal categorization and clustering. Once complete, it provides the output as an Excel spreadsheet as specified in the prompt. Be sure to review the data and verify the accuracy of the learning outcomes before copying the output into the benchmarking file. After processing, the organized data will look something like this. This same process can be applied to other datasets, such as course topics and additional benchmarking metrics. We can also visualize the output to better communicate the findings. As a quick tip, ChatGPT has memory functionality that can be triggered using a keyword. Instead of rewriting the full prompt each time, we can ask ChatGPT to store and reuse actions based on a trigger keyword. In this example, the keyword benchmark learning outcomes was saved in memory to automatically trigger the necessary actions for analysis.
So there's some other ways that we could use AI as well, but this is a very brief look at how we can address some of that. Jane, you're welcome to go to the next slide. So, when we talk about AI, we always have to be considerate about how we're using it. So consider, what is the source of that data? In this case, we pulled some PDFs, so we know exactly where that data is coming from. But if you just asked it to look at all these things on the entirety of the web, you would need to know, well, how old is this data, for example, or how complete is it? And also, depending on, if you're using ChatGPT, like the free version versus the paid one, there will be differences in that output as well. We want to consider things like privacy and ethics, or running a little low on time. Also, we need to make sure that even when, let's say it categorized the learning objectives there, we still need to go and look and see, did that categorization make sense? And in some cases, I might move things around, but also I'm not a subject matter expert. It might actually be better than me categorizing some of these as well. So again, reviewing that as well. And then, our institutions, they also have policies on, how we use AI. If we're using it, like as part of our process, we also want to communicate that we've used it that way as well. So that way people are informed.
Yeah, so as we wrap up, we want to give just a few tips from us as seasoned benchmarkers, and just a couple things to keep in mind as you start this benchmarking process. And the first one is, that every contribution matters. So making progress, even if it's in small steps, is still incredibly valuable. So as Aleithia mentioned earlier, sometimes you don't find much, but that's a trend in itself, and that's showing you data, and it's showing you, what else is out there and how you can be different. So even if it's small, it still matters. And again, kind of going off that, a lack of information can be a finding in itself. So sometimes identifying those gaps is just as important as uncovering those trends and answers. And then lastly, focusing on clear, objective facts helps you lay the groundwork for thoughtful analysis and decision making by others. So making sure you're kind of keeping your own thoughts and assumptions out of it, but just being clear and stating facts allows for others to analyze it and come up with a thoughtful analysis and make those decisions.
Yeah, just to build on that last point real quick, the information that we are gathering as benchmarking is really for the faculty to help them decide how they want to make the course. Ultimately, it is their course. We're there, to show them the data, to offer suggestions, but it's up to faculty to decide how they want to proceed.
I have a quick question.
Mhm.
So talking about presenting this data to faculty,
Mhm.
how have we found, how's the most digestible way to do that? Spreadsheet probably is not the answer. Do you have a couple, these are the highlights, or?
We generally we put together a report, and again, you could make that process more efficient with AI too. But also we'll share it with the faculty member, but then also walk them through it and see also people are busy, so sometimes they don't read their emails. But just kind of walk them through what that data was that was found. I think one thing too is we try to stick to the facts, but at the same time, where they kind of need to be swayed. So maybe you pay a little more attention on something in particular. And that also helps as well with some of that. So generally we do a report, but I think that depending on what's the scope, it also would vary too. If you're just looking for learning objectives, I mean, that could be a short table, right? Or it could even be the body of an email. So it kind of depends on the scope and how much in depth you're looking for, whether that's the course or the program as well.
In general, I think the more that you can move away from kind of written descriptions, whether that's a bulleted list, whether it's a chart or a graph, things that are, visuals or short things to help faculty absorb the information is really useful.
Mm-hmm. Especially when you're trying to find the trends, I think having those charts is very helpful.
Yeah, we've also had the opportunity after the report to kind of build a PowerPoint that pulls a lot of those charts and that very broken down information for those meetings that Clarissa was mentioning. So meeting with an instructor, or if it was a program, meeting with the program director, and pulling out those visuals in a PowerPoint format, I felt was really successful as well.
Well, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're already a couple minutes over. Jane, Clarissa, and I will hang out for a minute or two if anyone has further questions, but you're also very welcome to reach out to us by email. Jane's going to put those in the chat. Oh, just did. But otherwise, thank you so much for showing up and having a great discussion. We've enjoyed this.